Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion will focus on boosting Africa's digital economy. This is going to echo some of the key conversations that are happening at Transform Africa 2019. The Transform Africa Summit is happening here in Kigali. It started on Tuesday and ends tomorrow on Thursday. Our focus specifically is going to be on the future of work, or the future of jobs, if you will, as well as understanding the landscape of African tech talent across the continent. And joining this conversation, I am going to start with here on my left, yes, is Esther Kunda, who is from the Next Einstein Forum. And Esther is the manager in charge of policy innovation and community of scientists manager at the Next Einstein Forum. Yes. Very, very happy to have you here, Esther.
Thank you for having me.
We are also joined by Norbert Haguma. Norbert is the co-founder of Africa Gen. Thank you for joining this debate tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. My name is Yadam PC. I'm the host of The Square, and I'm joined by The Square's resident panelists. I'll start with my right. Charles Haba, always a pleasure to have you.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Good, yes.
And also today we are joined with Ephraim Ramenje. You were not here with us last week, so it's great to have you back.
Yeah, I missed an interesting show.
Yes, you
did. Yeah, but it's good to be back.
Yes. Also part of the resident panelist is Brenda Namata. She's not with us this evening, but I'm sure she's following the conversation from wherever she is. So before we, like we always do, before we get into the thick of things, we're just going to have a brief midweek recap. And a lot of very interesting things have been happening this week. Some of them, it's interesting to see that our highlight of last week was to do with the water crisis. And from then until today, there's been a lot of talk on the water management in the country with the statements from Rura and Wasak. Charles, you brought this up last week. Do you want to weigh in on it again? Or your statement last week was, that's all you had to say.
Two things about it. One, after the show last week, I was educated about a few things, about why water was, or the price of water was increased to the extent to which it was increased. And I got to learn, actually, that Wasak has been producing and distributing water at a loss. And that actually the cost of pumping water uphill and purifying it and doing all those processes until we get it in our taps is extremely expensive. And that is why I think they woke up to reality and said, we're actually selling very cheap water. I said, fine, that's a very, very good and justifiable reason. But how do we communicate it? How does a person in position of leadership come up and say it is actually a mindset change? The Rwandese need yet you have very good reasons as to why the price has been increased. So I think I think at the beginning of the last show, or the previous one, we did talk about the ineffectiveness of government communication, and there is a huge gap there. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think for me, I've always said this, and people can label me uncouth for the way I say it, but I feel like when we talk of public service, there's a certain level of arrogance that comes with it. Like, it almost shifts, and I think that's when we saw the open letter that was written. It's almost like there's no...
You don't name names.
I'm not going to say names. I'm not going to mention names, but it's almost like...
The open letter that was written by Dion Huari is the one you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly that one. So I think for me, it's I've said this, and I feel like there's a certain level of arrogance at certain levels of government, at least in the upper echelons of government, where instead of understanding that the services to the people, it's almost like the people have to beg to be heard or to be understood, or for them to get what is considered a very basic right. And it's the same thing when people complain about a price hike. Instead of showing them the respect as citizens who actually are paying these bills and actually explain to them what's going on, guys say it's a mindset problem. And automatically that kind of dismisses the person and says, your concerns are not valid, don't trust us, we know what we're doing. It doesn't work like that. And I think for me, I think this is an extreme representation of not just what's happening at Wasak, but across most government offices or institutions.
So you think basically your highlights of the week, if I'm hearing you correctly, are that there's a sort of gap when it comes to delivery of information in terms of public service to citizens?
Yeah, that's one, if you can call it that. I think it's also a mindset issue.
A mindset issue. Yes. Well, anyway, to our guests, are there any midweek highlights you'd like to share, or should we just dive into the conversation?
No, actually, I think that the subject of water is very important. It goes to the core of some of the issues we're having, in the country. And the way I see it is that, number one, it's a communication issue. I think that a lot of communication happens at the government level that doesn't necessarily reach down as it should. So like the people discuss and have the reasons, but it's not explained well. But there's also a problem of maybe technology or, the way we approach solving this infrastructure problem. Like I think for the water, it could be interesting to see what people can do if you maybe decentralize it a little bit, allow some, regions to do their own water system or maybe put it more the private sector so that the burden doesn't have to fall on the individuals as much. And if you have, easier access to water, it would make sense. So, but I think I like this discussion, the way it's happening. It's very beneficial to the country in general.
That's true. That's true. Well, we are going to get into the conversation. Like I said earlier on, it echoes some key discussions that are happening at Transform Africa Summit 2019. And we are here to discuss the digitalization of the digital economy, so to speak. And the first question is on the future of work, and I'll start with you, Norbert, before we get into the organizations that you work for or you founded and how they're contributing to this digital economy. When we talk about the future of work, digitalization is changing the nature of work. There's going to be more automation, there's going to be more artificial intelligence. And the question is, how do you think Africa should position itself to benefit from these inevitable changes? So we know that Africa is currently the youngest continent, and by 2050, most of the increase in the world's population will be in Africa. And by that time, definitely the future of work will be a reality. I mean, it already is, but it will be in Africa. So how do you think Africa as a continent should position itself to benefit from these changes?
So first of all, we have to understand the digital skills as a part of the digital economy infrastructure. It's a part of the infrastructure. It's not a standalone or something that you can take into different consideration than others. So in Africa, we have to look at it both from the basic literacy skills, so people being able to use emails and communicate, use words and other things like that, the digital tools. But you also have to look at the advanced skills. That means the people who actually build those tools that people can use. So in Africa, unfortunately, we're having challenges on both sides. So the people are not using digital services as much as they should, whether it's the SMEs, the individuals, the big companies, and at the same time, we are not having enough qualified people who actually create these products that we can use. So looking ahead maybe in 10 or 20 years, is definitely going to be a problem if we don't solve it. Especially there are some core technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain that are so important for the future of Africa, for our competitiveness, that if we are not grabbing this opportunity to really put a lot of resources into not just understanding them, but actually acquiring these technologies and making them our own, then we risk facing some issues going forward.
I think I want to just I want to pose a further question. When people have conversations on the digital economy, especially in the tech space, you find more buzzwords than anything. Actually, you have Africa where you have a lot of buzzwords around the Africa Rising.
Africa's time is now.
etc. Then you add the buzzwords of blockchain, AI.
The Internet of Things.
Smart Africa.
You have all of those things. But the question then comes, I think, and this is, for me, maybe a question posed to both the panelists, how realistic are some of these things, When we talk about the practicality, you talked about the divide. You talked of blockchain being necessary, and I know you're a big blockchain enthusiast. We talk about this technology, we talk about it being necessary for us to adopt it for the future competitive advantage, but in what context, When we talk about internet penetration, it's still very low. Even in Rwanda, I said this on the square the other day when Bernard talked about 5G. I said, okay, we're talking about 5, but we're still on 3, So it's like we have so many gaps along the way that already hindered what we already are trying to do. How realistic and how practical are some of the things that we now start to talk about when we talk about the future of technology and talk about a digital economy in relation to Africa?
Well, yes, I agree with you that some of these things are really buzzwords because they get repeated a lot, and the reason they get repeated a lot is because they are beneficial to corporations. So you get a big company which has invested in blockchain, they're going to push for it. You get companies like Huawei and others who have invested billions and billions of dollars in 5G. So of course they have to make a lot of noise about it. But we need to stay away from the noise. Blockchain technology, we're not going to go into too much details about it, but it's basically about, digitizing, it's about the Internet of Value. So like we have the Internet of Information and you have the Internet of Value. Up to today, we have not been able to really make value move as easily as information moves. And this is a big hindrance to Africa's development because if you're talking about the youth, the majority of African people being the youth, if they cannot get paid, then what are they going to do? They can't even access jobs. You're really limiting the opportunities for them. So it's not necessary to use the buzzwords, but you have to look at what's hiding behind the buzzwords. Now, the international value is extremely important for the creation of a digital economy that allows somebody from Nigeria to get paid by you, for example, for if you like somebody's blog and you can just send them 100 Rwandan francs, that could completely change how the youth sees the digital economy and how they see the opportunity going forward. And it's the same thing with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is basically the technology to make computers smarter and smarter, as smart as possible, so that we can automate things. So in other parts of the world, they have already replaced the legs, so that's the automobile and the bikes. Now they replace the hands, and soon they'll be replacing a big part of the day-to-day boring activity, so you can focus on the really important things. And I think we talked about it earlier. It's about efficiency as well. So if we're going to develop Africa the way that we want to develop it, we cannot ignore these technologies. But at the same time, you cannot put too much resources in them, forgetting electricity, for example, because without electricity, you have nothing.
Or water.
Or water. Or food.
So I think just to echo what Norbert is saying, for me, when I define digital economy, I define it as efficient and effective economies that are using, and we all know that at some point, digital is going to be the fuel that fuels those effective economies. So behind the buzzwords, there's connecting the billions of young people that are across Africa. How do you connect them? How do you create markets? Right now, with the trade, the free continental trade area, we're creating the biggest market in the world. But if you do not have, if people are not connected, how are you going to create that effective market? So for me, when we talk about digital economies, that's what we are talking about, effective and efficient. So with technologies like AI, what they're helping us do with specifically trade is having information about where everything else, making decision on where we are selling, and making decisions on where is the population that need these goods, etc., etc. And with blockchain, of course, we add trust in the trade sector, and all that. In healthcare sector, that is the same. How do we support doctors to make informed decisions better? And in Africa, so far, we have a shortage of doctors. We have a shortage of information that doctors have access to make those decisions. And really digitizing sectors like the healthcare, the finance, they support us in augmenting that.
I think for me, the sentiment I get from what I understand, from what you guys have said, is at the end of the day, it seems like it's top down. Coming back to this, you've talked about the healthcare system, right? You talk about helping doctors. So that means obviously the efficiency might affect cost, might affect ability to diagnose quicker, might improve the quality of service that a doctor gives. But then if we flip it on its head and say, what about the average man? Is he going to be a secondary beneficiary to technology, or is there an actual drive to say, how can we put these people first and address their issues first? versus it being a top-down kind of approach?
Definitely. So I think with digital, having a citizen or a person, let's say, for example, myself, with being a digital citizen, as we like, that is another buzzword. One of the idea is, in the morning I was listening to something around data in healthcare. Currently, if you have a chronic disease, you're going to go and see multiple doctors in different cities, in different countries, and all that. Every doctor, if you do not have your medical records, he is going to start over. As Africans, we are an oral population. We love oral population, but we love, I'll say, a myth around our being. So if I go to the doctor, I don't want to say everything. There's something I don't think the doctor needs to know this. This is not important. But with my health records, with me deciding I am disclosing this information to the doctor, giving access to the doctor, to my health records, then I give the doctor the power to do that. But me as a citizen, I decide that. And of course, so in terms of how we're trying to empower a person to own their own data, to own what they produce in terms of digital information out there. So that is mostly the benefit.
Okay, that's the majority benefit. I think also, okay, I would say a mild skeptic of the belief that technologies will solve our problems. You know, I think there's I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that it almost seems like we use technology to avoid dealing with the actual problems we have in society. And you find that at the heart of it, we talked of the communication, the challenge with the water crisis. I'll go back to that. We said that it was a communication problem. I don't think it's a communication problem.
You think it's a technology problem?
No. Because you could learn the skills to use technology, which is the social media and all these various platforms to send out your message. But the problem at the heart of it is the character that makes it. That makes that person behind that platform, behind the message that needs to go out to say that it's okay to tell people, citizens, that it's your mindset problem and it's your fault, and you'll be fine. And that for me is what I'm trying to say, is that before the technology comes in, there's so many things on the ground practically that get missed, that we try to mask. Like I would say, like you have a deep cut, and you take a Band-Aid and you cover it. You've not dealt with the problem. It's temporary. And it looks cool for the moment. You actually probably even get one that's your skin tone, so it looks even sexy, and it fits the mold, and you get all the praises for having that technology, but it hasn't solved the problem. And coming back to institutional coordination, we have e-governance in Rwanda, and we've actually made significant strides around that. But because behind the technology, there's some of the systems and structures are lacking. Even with that technology, it still misses the point. And I think somebody mentioned this recently, that some people would rather stand in line than pay that extra fee for IREM. For them, exactly, and that automatically is like, okay, then what is the problem? You know, and this is something I think. That's what I'm trying to ask or drive home. I'm trying to say, when we talk about technology and the digital economy, and we talk about all of this, at the end of the day, the largest players in the economy are the citizens, right? The people who either benefit or lose out in that economy. To what extent does these frameworks and this ideology put them at the center of it?
To answer your question, maybe not asking him how are they put in these frameworks, but like what should be done.
It pretty much, yeah.
So not answering the question, but in case you don't have an answer, I don't know if you do, but a suggestion on what should be done. But Charles, just very quickly, want to say something.
Before I miss my point, and I think Ephraim, thank you so much for tickling me. The practicality of this digital conversation we're having around Rwanda, and saying, you know, we are the leaders in the region, and you know how cosmetic we are about it. And I like the example of getting a deep wound and just covering it with a bandage. There is no single leader in our government that does not have a Twitter account. But go into their handles and see Even when you tag them as mayors, director generals, or whatever position they hold, see how often they respond. So in effect, they have their Twitter handles because they are required to have Twitter handles. These respective institutions have all these social media pages, whatever forums on which they are, because they are required, and they will look good that they have them. But to what extent do they use them? And it's extremely embarrassing that we are not walking this talk. I will take it a notch higher and say, if our courts of law accept digital evidence, an email, WhatsApp messages, if RIB and police can arrest you because you exchanged WhatsApp recordings, and they provide that as evidence for arresting
you. Or you post indecent pictures.
Or you post indecent pictures, and then a person in a high office up there holds you to book because of that. Then why is it that when you write an email, this director general, that mayor, that person of responsibility in a government office will tell you, no. You write a letter. Take it to the Central Secretariat. They receive it. It goes to the assistant, then to the technician, then to the what, and then we will respond to you. So even the immigration that we praise every day of the week. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I went to the immigration and I got an impeccable service. But I met somebody there who pressed the button of the queue management system. And I asked him, Chief, so what's up? Have you been attended to or what? Because I was waiting. So I needed to come up with a conversation with somebody I knew. So the guy had pressed the queue management system and it told him he was number 200 and something. Between me and him, we did a quick head count. There were not even 50 people in the room. So we observed that people actually do not use the queue management system. They prefer to physically queue on the benches, and they know I'm after this guy, and they'll form that zigzag until they get there. So why are we investing in all this, yet we don't want? So it's a really around the point is really around the practicality. Let's walk the talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
You're more or less saying that, and the way we really position ourselves as an ICT hub, you've heard those buzzwords about Rwanda very many times, but it's different when it comes to practically actually engaging in these technologies for our country. But I want to just briefly talk about, still on the issue of the future of work and everything. Africa, in terms of tech, in terms of digital economy, we've leapfrogged a couple of things. For instance, mobile telephony, from using the handset phone, we were straight into mobile phones, and this changed a lot in terms of finance, in terms of connectivity. There's certain things compared to the West that we've kind of jumped over to get to where we are. In terms of digital economy, do you think that can happen? And I want to give an example. Do you think blockchain can be the solution in leapfrogging digital economy? And before you answer that question, I just thought, as we were talking, I think we just dived into things, but for the sake of our viewers, maybe, can you, in a nutshell, explain what blockchain is?
Wow, okay.
In the simplest form. I mean, I know what it is, I can explain what it is, but I think you're the blockchain guru in Kigali, so to speak. In simple terms, if you can explain at least its purpose.
Right.
And why you think it can be used as a technological tool to leapfrog in the digital economy.
Yeah, so the simplest way to understand blockchain is really it's a record of who owns what. And that record is shared by anybody instead of being in a central place. So that record of who owns what, it can be about assets that you own. It can be like a cryptocurrency. It can also be digitized or tokenized assets. Like now people are actually building houses and tokenizing them and having people buy them. You can basically anything can be tokenized. So once it's tokenized, then you can share it as a value. But to understand why it's important is you have to understand what problem it solved, which the internet could not solve. So when the internet sends information, it copies information all over the place. When you send a message from your phone to mine, it just goes on copying until it gets to me. And that cannot be done for money. Like you cannot copy 5,000 francs and I send you 5,000, I keep 5,000. That is, the money would lose its value immediately. So that's something that the internet could not solve except by using central services such as PayPal or MTN for mobile money. So blockchain solves this by giving you this technology that allows you to actually exchange value with other people in a way that there is nobody in between, controlling that. But something that most people, get wrong about blockchain is not really about removing the powers to be or, the central bank or replacing with digital money that nobody controls or nobody owns. No, it's mostly about keeping track of things. So it's not about...
It's transparency, actually.
It's transparency.
At its very essence, and trust.
Yes, and it's creating trust in between people. And it's bringing the service that we don't yet have. Like in Africa, we don't have any payment system, whether it's mobile money, except maybe for Visa, that you can actually use universally on the continent. So that's the kind of thing that is, is going to try to achieve. But maybe to...
In terms of leapfrogging.
Yeah.
Do you think?
In terms of leapfrogging, there's something very interesting is if you go into the countryside of most African countries, you will find that the clothes they are wearing, the tools they are using, the crops they are planting even haven't changed much in the last 100 years. But
including the clothes they're wearing.
Obviously, some are a little bit more stylish, but you still wear a top.
You still wear something made of cotton or silk or whatever.
You can say that the clothes is imported from China or things like that.
I understand.
There hasn't been much change in terms of technology for most of the rural Africa. But what you will find is a mobile phone in everybody's hand.
That's true.
And you'll find that all of them use, mobile money, at least a large majority of them. And the way you have to look at it, leapfrogging is also another buzzword. What I'm more interested in is actually ownership of the technology. So one example I can say is Umuganda. Now, Umuganda plus WhatsApp, something that most people don't really realize how important that is. Or having a family wedding or something, like just organizing amongst people plus WhatsApp. What would it be without WhatsApp?
Exactly,
those
groups.
That's true.
You have to look at it that way. So that's what technology does. So yes, you can leapfrog some technologies, like in our case, we leapfrogged the landline directly into mobile phone because it was more efficient. Now I think we're also going to leapfrog credit cards, for example. Credit cards.
Credit cards, yes.
Right. I don't think that Africa is going to adopt credit cards much because of blockchain technology and mobile money. Because they don't make it, it's basically redundant, And when you see that when you go to China is that most Chinese people, they get a credit card when they're going abroad. Within China, they just use Alipay and WeChat and use QR code to scan and do everything. And you can still get the benefits of a credit card by, having like a Jima credit in Alibaba, which is a way of giving you a credit based on how much money you spend. If you're doing all your activities online, it's very easy actually to estimate what kind of loan
your worth is.
What your worth is. Actually, by simply looking at your SMSs, I can tell you how much money I can give you as a loan. Because I see how many times you buy bundles. I see how much mobile money you send to somebody. So this is the kind of leapfrogging that I think are more realistic and are going to happen very soon. But it's not
in
like...
Africa.
Yeah, in Africa, and it's actually happening right now. But if you're ambitious enough, we can actually go beyond that. Because for technology like blockchain, it's so early in the world that we can actually, if we really put our mind to it, we can take the lead.
We can lead on it,
We can absolutely lead on it. And it's the same thing we have done with mobile money. I mean, it started in Kenya with a semi-British company, but it did start in Kenya and it was exported to Afghanistan and to all these other countries. So we have to look at our weaknesses and our limited resources and put some really strong, work into developing technologies, but technologies that are fit with our context. So going back to Muganda and all of this, we have to look at the way that we live and say, okay, how can we improve on that? Charles talked about communication.
By leaders to Rwandan citizens.
Yeah. I mean, even in Rwanda, we are actually working on a solution to that. Now that when a citizen posts a complaint, it is not only shared to the person who's concerned, but it goes to higher ups, and somebody has to check if you have solved that. So again, this is a technology at work helping improve citizens' life. But what we cannot, what we should not think is that this technology is going to come and either be on the top or on the bottom. It has to be all the way. At the top it's necessary, because how else are we going to have the money to do more? How are we going to manage our economies if we don't have the right technologies to manage things and to visualize things and to plan properly? Because the more information you have, the better you can plan. And then you come down to the grassroots. To the grassroots, and you find that, well, mobile money is extremely important for the farmer who maybe has emergency or has some business to do or something like that. But we still have a very long way to go.
Esther, I'd like you to weigh in on this.
So I think on the issue of leapfrogging, one of the things that I don't like first is the fact that most African governments have used it to put a blinder on building roads, on providing electricity, and other basic infrastructure. And one of the things that we should not forget is, if we're digitizing the whole of Africa, electricity is going to be a key component on it's really a basic infrastructure on what we need. So one, we need to keep our governments accountable to not keep the word leapfrogging as a bad buzzword to ensure that there's actually some infrastructure that we have, basic infrastructure that is necessary. But on the other hand, going to what Norbert was saying, we have now an advantage over the world on being a leader in some of these technologies. We know China and Taiwan have been leading in terms of manufacturing. They're the best manufacturers on components of our phones. So can we take advantage of blockchain? At NEF, we always talk about some of the key technologies that include energy storage, blockchain, quantum computing. Because we have all this data, there's going to be new technologies on how we compute, how our computers work. Can we take the lead into these new technologies? And it's very important, while we're giving digital skills to the citizen, while we are empowering, we're digitizing our government services, we're having e-commerce. That is in the now, that we're already behind the whole world. But then these other technologies, we have a very good platform. With quantum computing, we have energy. I believe in terms of energy production in the world, we have a very good advantage that we could use to invest in quantum computing. But these are heavy investments that governments really need to have sort of foresight on what they're thinking about.
I like the way you said what most governments across the continent have been doing is using leapfrogging as a blinder to basic necessities, infrastructure, whether it's roads, whether it's electricity, issues that are necessary for just even the basic digitalization of things. But before we go into the next part of the conversation, I'd like to just hear from both of you on the work that you do. I'm sure your organizations, from what we know, are bridging the digital divide, not only in Rwanda, but also across the continent. And I'd like to start with you, Esther. If you can just share some of the work that, just very briefly, that the Next Einstein Forum does through aims to contribute to the digital economy.
Okay. So one of our main work at the Next Einstein Forum, what we do is we are trying to raise awareness around scientific excellence in the world. But really at the core of it is, can we expose the public, governments, and other stakeholders to the scientific advances that are happening right now? And within that, we are creating a community of scientists, young African scientists, that are currently producing the best work in the world in AI, in genomics, in blockchain, that the ones patenting some of the advances in blockchain and all the other technologies. And we're trying to create that community so that if any government, any private company is looking at this technology as future business ventures, they know who to talk to. And also, one of the important things is, if we're doing strategies and policies, we need to know what is 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. And we all know with research, what is being researched and published right now is what is going to be public and in the public domain in the next 5 to 10 years. And then with aims, we're doing two things. We've started the first machine intelligence masters, trying to really equip young people in Africa on these new technologies. We opened in Rwanda last year, and this year we're also going to open in Ghana. But on top of that, the most exciting work that I'm always excited about is the Quantum Leap Africa, which is where we're trying to nurture the quantum computing. So looking at these new computing technologies, space technologies, researching on space technology. We also, a month ago, the picture of the black hole. Unfortunately,
yes,
unfortunately, no station in Africa was participated in that.
And it was a global event.
Yeah, it was a global partnership, a global collaboration, but there was no African institution that participated in that. Although we had 3 African scientists in that project, but there was none. So what we are trying to do is create those environments. And then, of course, at NEF, we're creating also a policy institute to get scientists as experts to tell us what could be the foresight, the new policies that we should be looking at in the next few years.
Fantastic. Very quickly from you, Norbert.
Well, first of all, I really like what
Esther and
NEF are doing.
Yeah, it's
very
great
impressive.
work. Yes.
I'm the co-founder of AfricaGen,
Yes.
which is a Pan-African youth technology organization. So we consider ourselves as promoters of technology on the continent, and we do many things, including hackathons, and including training and other things to really get the youth here.
So hackathons are tons for hackers, or?
So hackathon is the hacking marathon, but it's not the hacking in a bad way. It's like hacking ideas.
I think all the street signs in the country were done in a hackathon, if I'm not mistaken. The KG123, back in the day at Caleb, right?
Digital Muganda.
Digital Muganda.
Exactly,
They
that's
should
what
bring
it
that
is.
back.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah,
The Digital Muganda. I would like to see. We really want to see more and more of these events because we consider it is one of the best way to get people to understand the technology, especially because you interact with your peers and you learn from each other.
And you create.
And you create, of course. So there's this sense of accomplishment when you've worked on a project for 2 days on something you thought you would never understand. So like last year we had the blockchain hackathon where we got a group of about 70 young Rwandans, 18 to 25, to work on blockchain. And when they arrived, nobody knew about blockchain. And after 2 days, they could teach you about blockchain and understand what it is.
Fantastic.
But going forward, our really big project that we are working on right now is the Africa Digital Index. So it comes to answer some of those questions that you asked earlier, is which one do we prioritize? The big scientific efforts like NEF is doing, or the really on the grassroots effort. So the way we see that this needs to be solved is that, first of all, if you want to progress in the digital economy, you need to measure. So in Africa, it is not really being measured. And we created a really well thought out plan of 8 categories and about 30 indicators of what needs to be measured in each country in Africa in order to understand the progress on the digital economy. So we start, of course, with electricity, because without electricity, you have nothing.
There's nothing.
Then we have to go to connectivity, you have to go to human resources, then to digital use in the business, in the government, in all of that, and try to measure to see what weight to give to each one of them. But what you have learned from this process is that indeed in every African country is different, but you start to see some trends, and you can see that just by having this kind of measurement, you can really help our policymakers to identify where to put their money and how to use it. So it's of course inspired by the Doing Business report and the World Competitiveness report from the World Economic Forum, but this is African by Africa, Africans, and it's really meant to measure the digital economy and its progress, and to say, okay, for example, in Rwanda we have the price of internet is quite low, compared to our neighboring countries. So that would give us a plus, but you'll find that maybe the price of electricity might be high, and they will give us a minus. And it can really give you an idea of where the government should be putting their money. But most importantly, really, why we did this to begin with, is for the startups. So one of the biggest problems that many really creative minds that we have encountered in our hackathons and other events is that you find that it's very difficult for them, especially if they're just out of university or out of high school, to understand where the needs are. So if, for example, I want to do a logistics application, then how do I know which part of Rwanda actually has, maybe Jumia is delivering there or has any access to logistics? It's very difficult to find. So we think that by putting this information together, initially it will be country, but it can go all the way down to the village. Then you're giving the tools necessary for our startups to actually plan and say, okay, I'm doing logistics in Nigeria, the Northeast, nothing there, let me put my money there.
So actually, incidentally, you mentioned Jumia, which is the next part of our question and the next part of the conversation. Before we end, I just wanted to talk about tech talent. I mean, talent across Africa in terms of technology, in terms of developers, basically the skill set. And I think you all know that recently Jumia came under fire for saying that the reason they don't hire any African developers is because they're none to a few that exist. So if you can just tell us, based on your experience, you know, working at Next Einstein Forum and from AfricaGen, what do you think is the landscape really on the ground, the reality on the ground for the landscape of tech talent in the continent, and how can we change this narrative that it is non-existent? You know, you hear of stories where our best scientists, our best developers, our best software engineers are hired, you know, abroad, Facebook in Europe or Google in different parts of the West. How can we change this narrative? I'll start with you, Esther.
Okay. So one, for me with Jumia, I would agree with them in the first 2 years when they started.
Yes.
When they started, really, they didn't have as experienced. You couldn't find as experienced developers as you would want at that level. But almost 10 years into their existence, that is not an excuse. Even in Rwanda, even in Nigeria, it would be very unflattering to see that people have built M-Pesa, people have built Flutterwave, people have built other systems are unable to hold a normal e-commerce platform like Jumia. So for me, for the longest that they've been here, one, I would say it's a lack of nurturing talent in the ecosystems where they've been, because they invested, when they started in Rwanda, I remember in the first few with Hello Food, the first few, when you ordered, it would take 3 hours to 4 hours to get food. They invested a lot of money in public awareness. The same could have been done in creating that pipeline for them. But on the other side, for me, what I'm looking at is how do we create a lot of aims, centers of excellence? How do we create, get Andela in most countries, but also even in high school, how do we start empowering young people in high school with to start thinking about being developers? Because I see it in STEM, really, someone who's doing a PhD in physics has basic coding and developing skills. There's a very fundamental, as you know how to write, you know how to do your addition, your subtraction, simple and basic coding should be a requirement. So then, like, with that, we'll really build a pipeline of talent.
Absolutely. Robert?
Yeah, so first of all, I think some of the blame is on us. I don't see how you can allow anybody to come and build all kind of Jumias on your continent and you never ask them to hire. It's not understandable, really. I think there's a problem at the top that we should not allow this. Facebook is here, Google is here, WhatsApp, Instagram, all of them. How many Africans do they actually use if they're using that much of our data? So that, for me, is one way to see things.
Absolutely.
And the other way to see things is, first of all, the people who used to work at Jumia, most of them have gone on to create great startups of their own. So the talent really, I don't think, was a problem. I think it was more of an attitude issue of saying, okay, we don't have this talent here, but it's never going to get here. But if you look at India, if you look at China and other countries, initially, yes, they didn't have the talent, but then developed. But I also want to put the blame on us directly. Like, why can't we develop these platforms? Why does it have to be developed in Europe? And we use it, and we don't support the ones that are developed here? It's really mind-boggling when you think about it, because I don't see where else this can happen. So Jumia has been good to Africa in ways. I'm not saying Jumia is bad. It really introduced these technologies, and it allowed some people to get some good experience. But now we have to think about creating our own tools and empowering those who are creating them.
And just to echo what His Excellency President Paul Kagame said at today's Transform Africa, he, in his concluding remarks, were you there? Well,
yes.
I know you were there. And he said that, you know, the power to transform, I'm paraphrasing, the digital economy, these changes that we're talking about at Transform, they exist in the room, in the room that we were in. And or across the continent. And also, to just echo what you're saying, the UNCTAD boss, Mr. Kituyu, mentioned that, you know, the way we give tax incentives for international sort of investors who are coming to invest in IT and technology and basically the digital economy, we should extend the same incentives to our locals. That is always a gap. And I know on the Square we've talked about how we deal with foreign versus local investors, and it's always an issue. So these are things that just have to change if we really want to take the lead in digital economy.
To add something on that, it's very obvious that the indexes that we like the World Economic Forum Competitiveness Index, do not benefit African startups at all. So that's one of the motivations why we had to do what we are doing now.
Africa Gen, your initiative.
Yes, because so if the way that, and these indexes are extremely influential. Like when you start digging deep into the smart policies of this country or that country, and all these policies, you find out that these reports have gone all the way in very deeply. You know, those are the benchmarks that people use. So we need to change the benchmarks if we really want to achieve that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for this conversation. I think it's been extremely eye-opening. I love the fact that, you know, a lot of the times on the Square, we are not experts. We bring in experts to shed lights and to teach us, and not only us, but also viewers. And I think you're doing really great work. So, Norbert, thank you very much. And all the best with Africa Gen. Is Africa Gen short for Africa Generation?
Actually, it's both generation and gen, as in like oxygen and hydrogen, like the makers of Africa.
Nice. Creatives. And Esther, thank you very much on behalf of Next Einstein Forum. So like we always do when it's someone's birthday on the Square, we kind of celebrate it on the Square. And today we have someone who is turning a very nice age. I'm not going to say your age, but Ephraim, happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like to say something very quickly.
I made a bet with someone that you guys are not going to pull this off.
I don't know, that happens. That happens for all of the Square panelists.
I've lost the bet.
Yes.
But yeah, no, this is an honor. Thank you so much. I really love you guys.
Yeah, we love you too.
Yeah.
Thank you, and have a very happy birthday.
But I'm not sharing this cake with you, though.
No, you have to.
Take it.
Yes. Well, happy birthday, Charles.
Happy birthday, friend.
I think yours passed, but we will do it this year.
Every year I celebrate a birthday.
Yes. We didn't celebrate it last year, but we will this year. Yes. Well, thank you to the panelists, Charles, Ephraim, Esther, and Norbert. Very insightful discussion. I would like us to I'd like to take this moment to thank our partners, Uzi Collections, as well as Bourbon Coffee. And to those watching, please keep the conversation going on our social media, especially on Twitter, using the hashtag #TheSquareRW. Thank you for watching, and have a very good night. Thank you.